Hello and welcome to the podcast Love, Life and Loss. Today we have Emily joining us. Thank you so much for agreeing to do this today, Emily. So, would you like to start with telling your story from your beginning and whatever that may look like to you?
Sure. Thank you for inviting me to come and talk about my experience. I'm very much a talker. I like to process these things. So this is an amazing opportunity. So I think my hope by telling my story and sharing what happened to me is that people who've been in a similar situation kind of feel seen, feel validated, because I know that's something that I struggled with when I had this experience. So yeah, that would be my hope. And I'm going to be sharing my story from the beginning, but I'm really here to talk about my experience of miscarriage.
Okay.
And I
Now,
know that particularly it's early miscarriage. I know that's something that a lot of people don't feel able to talk about. A lot of people don't feel that they should have such big emotions around an early miscarriage. And I think a lot of people don't know how to support people who go through that and what they might need in that time. And I really didn't understand what really happens in early miscarriage. So going through this experience myself has also enabled me to think about how I would support somebody and how I have supported people who have experienced that themselves since I've had that experience as well. And sort of, there is a grieving period as well for a lot of people, maybe not everybody, and that's okay. And I think people need to be able to go through that process without guilt or thinking, but people have really late term miscarriages or children who are full term and are stillborn. How can I possibly compare my experience to that? But it's your experience, it's unique to you, and your feelings and how you process that, it's valid, it's all valid.
yeah,
And I think
100%. And I just,
yeah.
sorry, I am interrupting, but that I just wanted to emphasize on that. You're 100% right. And it's so true. And I always say it, there is no hierarchy in baby loss. A loss is a loss, and everyone's hard is hard.
Yeah, no, and I think that's something that people, definitely need to hear, and it is something I still struggle with a little bit as well, because I think, again, because of how other people might view it, because if they haven't experienced it with somebody close to them, or somebody close to them that has experienced it hasn't really talked to them about that, they really might not understand how these things play out, the impact they can have physically, emotionally. So yeah, so I hope that it's helpful to somebody, whether that's somebody who's had this experience or somebody who wants to support somebody sort of going through that experience. So I would say my story starts in my early 20s, really, because this is the time when I was told you're not going to be having children naturally, you won't conceive naturally. So it's a long story, which I won't elaborate on too much, but I had a perforated appendix that created a lot of scar tissue and adhesions for me. And in terms of conceiving naturally moving forward, I was pretty much told it's going to be very difficult, if not impossible, for you to do that. So that's how I spent the majority of my adult life, believing that's not going to happen for me naturally. So fast forward many, many years into my mid 30s, in a great relationship. We've just bought a house together. We've moved into that house. I'm decorating our bedroom, I'm painting our bedroom, and I'm not feeling well. My period was late, but that wasn't unusual for me. I'd sort of gone through 15 years of like gynae issues, and that was just like another day, another month for me. It wasn't a big issue. But something in me just said, maybe you are pregnant. Just check this out tomorrow. So at work the next day, I sort of bought some cheap pregnancy tests, did them in the toilet at work. They were negative, put them back in the box, went back to my desk. I didn't want to throw them in the toilets there because I didn't want any sort of wagging tongues. And I thought I'll chuck them in the bin at the end of the day when I know the cleaners will be here soon. They'll be emptying the bins and no one's going to see these tests in there. So roll round to the end of the day. I look at these tests again before I chuck them away, and they're positive. So I'm like, no. Immediately on the phone to my friend, does this happen? She's like, no, you don't get false positives. I said, yeah, but they've been in my bag all day. And I checked them after like 15 minutes and, there was nothing on there. She was like, I think you need to go and get another test. So run to Superdrug quickly before it shuts, get a decent test, run home, do the test. And I'm 2 to 3 weeks pregnant. And I am shell shocked at this point. So I'm still living with my housemate at the time. We're decorating our house to move into. My partner's kind of wrapping up his life somewhere else. We're getting ready to kind of, you know, start our lives together, really. And I'm like, are you sitting down? Because I've got some news for you. And obviously, having children and my situation is something we had discussed. Of course, you know, we knew that if we wanted children, there was going to be a process we were going to have to go through. And we had discussed that and we'd started talking about that. And I think the shock of it, I was like, we're not ready for this. And he was like, of course we are. Look at us. You know, we're moving into a house together. I'm like, yeah, but we weren't expecting to have a child. And this house is quite a small house. He's like, look, we're in a great position. This is going to be great. But what I knew is that I was high risk of things like ectopic pregnancy. So I was like, we need to just, you know, chill out and I'll go for an early scan. We'll have a look. I just don't want to get excited about this yet. So I went for an early scan. I think I was, date wise, I think it was about 7 or 8 weeks at that point by the time I got the early scan. And I didn't even let my partner come in with me because I was convinced myself. I was like, look, this isn't going to be a viable pregnancy. I feel like if he's not here, I can just sort of say, no, it's what I thought, you know, and we will just move on. But there was a heartbeat. And the sonographers were like, where's your partner? And I was like, he's in the waiting room. They were like, well, let's go get him. And he came in and I was crying and it was amazing. So the rest is history with that, really. So I had a great pregnancy. I had regular scans to check that everything was okay, other than being told that our son was a girl.
Oh.
Everything went smoothly. And yeah, so however many months later, our son arrives. He's amazing. Our world completely changes. That all happens during COVID. So we were in lockdown. So very different experience to, you know, what a lot of people might have when they have their baby, and particularly their first baby as well. But yeah, we're obviously over the moon. This is the best thing that's ever happened. And although it was not really planned, we were both just so happy. And it was just the best thing that could have happened. Excellent timing, apart from COVID. But in terms of where our lives were, it was you know, wicked timing. We were just so happy. Yeah. So if we then fast forward about 6 months later, we get another little shock, which is that I'm pregnant again. So we were probably more shocked this time because we're thinking we've got a 6-month-old baby. You know, COVID is still kind of there. There's still like threats of lockdowns. We've had lockdowns, like all that stuff's kind of still going on. But we very quickly get excited about it. And I feel like this time we just kind of went into autopilot. We were like, right, do we need to move or do we need to extend the house? Or like, we've got a new car because we were like, we're not going to fit 2 car seats in a car. And I think we just couldn't believe our luck, really, that I had gone from, right, you're never going to, you know, be able to conceive naturally, to we've got this gorgeous son and we're going to have another child. And all that kind of sort of apprehension I had the first time, I don't really feel that was there as much. I was just like, right, let's go. We've got all the stuff, like we're prepared, you know. So I feel, other than financially thinking, oh my God, 2 children in childcare, we were over the moon. We were really happy about it. So again, I had an early scan. Now, when I reflect back, I think there was probably questions that should have been asked, but there was a heartbeat. There was some query over dates, but there wasn't any major concerns at that time. So the baby was measuring it at 6 weeks. I'd go through the same process. So I would have regular scans. I'd sort of be consultant led again. So I just felt confident about that because everything had gone so well the last time during my pregnancy, and I ended up enjoying the pregnancy. I loved being pregnant. So after all that initial kind of apprehension and worry, maybe like 20, 24 weeks, I just really loved it. I loved being pregnant. So I was excited, and I'd even said to my boss, I'm not even back from maternity leave yet, but there may be a chance that I will be going on maternity leave very soon after I come back to work. So yeah, so we started making those preparations, and we just sort of felt like there's going to be so much we're going to do this time that we didn't do last time. And yeah, it was just like, it was an exciting time, really. And I think especially because the world was a weird place at that time. It was
Yeah.
another little kind of ray of sunshine. Yeah. And I think anyone that had a baby or young children in that time can testify that it was weird. It was a weird, experience. And, how you were able to socialize with other people, or, the support you had, it was just different. So, and, something I know now is that that really did affect my mental health. But at the time, I was just in that kind of sort of survival mode. So when I should have been about 10 weeks pregnant, I was spotting. So I noticed some bleeding. I hadn't bled in my previous pregnancy, so I was concerned, but at the same time, didn't panic because I thought, I know this happens. So I'm not going to panic about this, but I'll go to the doctors. It was a weekend, went to the doctor. And this is another thing I will talk a lot about, is my experience of kind of how I was cared for throughout this process as well. But it was bad from the beginning. So this is where it was bad. So I was told, because I'd had an early scan, they wouldn't scan me at the hospital because I was bleeding. And I just knew that wasn't right. I knew that wasn't right. It was an elderly doctor, I would say, and a
Okay.
male, which I think in this situation is probably relevant. Um, and he said, well, I'll ring the hospital and check now. And I said, yes, please, because I thought, I know they're going to say, of course you need to come for a scan. Of
Yeah.
course you do. So that's what happened. He rang the hospital and they said, yeah, she needs to come for a scan. And he gave my details and I was told I'd be contacted. That didn't happen. So I waited 2 days and I was still bleeding at this point. So obviously I'm more concerned that this has continued. So I'm on the phone to 111, doing everything I can think to do, particularly as it's a weekend. And I went to urgent care. They couldn't do anything. They couldn't scan me. They said, we'll obviously talk to the ultrasound department and it all just felt a bit disjointed. I didn't really feel like anybody was communicating with anybody else. Luckily, I had a friend who worked in that area of the hospital who called for me on Monday and got the ball rolling. And I totally slipped through the net. There was nobody going to contact me about a scan.
Oh.
So on the Tuesday, I went for the scan. And by this point, I think I had already come to my own conclusions that this probably was a miscarriage. And there was a little bit of confusion. Another consultant came in, but ultimately they couldn't find a heartbeat. And they said that actually the baby had stopped growing at about 6 weeks. So I'd gone to kind of another 4 weeks after my scan, continuing to sort of prepare for my pregnancy, obviously still having pregnancy symptoms, as you do, because you still have the hormones. And yeah, so obviously devastated, absolutely devastating. So they gave us our options and explained that because I'd had a cesarean section sort of not that long ago, the best thing that I could do is come to the hospital so they could sort of monitor things. There can be issues around bleeding, but that they were very much convinced that they would need to start the process of the miscarriage because it was a miscarriage. They didn't believe this was going to start on its own. So, they said,
Sorry to interrupt, Emily. So what do you
yeah,
mean the baby, I hate to use this term, but the baby wouldn't pass by
that's
themselves
right. Yeah,
naturally?
absolutely. Yeah. So they said, go home and have a think about what you want to do. You can stay at home and we'll give you some medication and we'll start the process that way. But we very much do recommend that you come in because of the risks with bleeding if you've had a cesarean section. So they sent me away with some information that just sort of talked about if things do start on their own, so the baby does start passing on its own, that you know, look out for this, look out for that. This is kind of normal. This is not normal, and you need to come in to A&E if this happens. But otherwise, ring us and we'll get you booked in, and they will do what's called a D&C. So this is a procedure where they dilate the cervix, and then they kind of use a implement to remove the uterine lining. So anything that kind of shouldn't really be there is taken away. And normally that is done under anaesthetic. So you would have that procedure done under anaesthetic ordinarily. So I got home and I just wasn't, I mean, we just started to process really what was, going to happen and what do we want to do. And I said, I've got a young son as well. I need to do what's safe. So I'll ring them and I'll go into hospital. But then things started happening on their own. So I started bleeding at home and it was all very sudden and very quick. And then it kind of stopped. And I assumed that was it, that it had happened. And then I believe that evening I started actually having contractions. And then the bleeding started again. But this time it was a significant bleed, like concerning. So I was checking all this paperwork that the hospital had given me, and I was like, yeah, this is more than I should be bleeding. So I obviously need to go to hospital and get looked after. So no one could go with me because I can't remember if we were actually in a lockdown, but we were definitely very restricted still at this point. So my friend came and she drove me to A&E. And when I say, I mean, I was bleeding a lot. So I was sat on a towel, this kind of level of bleeding. And I'm sharing this because it's got relevance as I kind of move on to my story as well. And my friend had to drop me at A&E. And I knew there was no point in my partner coming with me and having somebody else take care of our son because I knew he wasn't going to be able to stay with me. So in my mind, it just made sense for them to stay together at home. And for me to kind of go through this process. And really, I'm not processing it at this point. I'm kind of in that, right, we've got to get this sorted kind of mode. So I explained to the receptionist at A&E, and I'm sitting down in the normal waiting room with everybody whilst bleeding significantly, having to go to the toilet and do the best I can to kind of manage this situation. And a few hours
by yourself at this point.
Yeah, by myself. So all the things that happen in A&E, most people have been in A&E, we've got people in handcuffs, we've got people with a police officer, we've got people with broken bones, we've got, it's just everything is going on. I'm obviously in this very vulnerable situation and just not really knowing what to do. So in the end, I just had to beg and say, I need to go in a side room because I can't manage this bleed sitting in this room with all these people, and I need a little bit kind of support in this situation. So eventually, after asking kind of quite a few times, they take me to a side room and I said, can somebody get me some pads or something or something to sit on because I'm literally just like flooding now, constantly going to the toilet, but there's a toilet and I can't be hogging this toilet the whole time. And eventually somebody comes to see me and, I understand that they have to, they're overstretched, the priorities. It was COVID times. It was crazy, absolutely crazy times. But from this point on, everybody who dealt with me didn't really know what to do with me and asked really irrelevant questions. I was even asked if my pregnancy was planned. I think I shared that with you.
That's so bizarre and so not relevant to anything.
No. Regardless of the circumstances or anybody's situation, that is never going to be a relevant question to ask in that situation. But it was a very casual approach, lots of waiting. I'm obviously panicking at this point and my dignity as well, because bleeding very heavily. I kind of chucked some stuff in a bag and that was kind of the best I did, my charger, the things that I knew, were kind of essential. And I was simultaneously talking to my friend who worked in that department, and she was talking to a consultant she knows and who works up there, and he was just saying she just needs to get up to the ward. She needs to be in the ward. If she's bleeding that heavily, she's going to need a D&C, and we're going to need to get that sorted for her. So after lots of toing and froing, giving me an ECG, which was baffling because why would that be sort of necessary in this situation? They said, right, as soon as we've got an IV into you, then a sort of cannula, we can take you up to the ward. But at this point, because I'd been bleeding so heavily, I was really dehydrated. They couldn't get into my veins. So I think anyone in that situation has probably had a similar kind of experience. So this became the next issue, and I think I spent an hour with various different people trying to get into my vein.
Oh wow.
They even had to use the kind of ultrasound thing to try and find
Oh
somewhere
my
to put this
God.
cannula in. And at this point, they have kind of put me in a side ward with all kinds of stuff going on. And two people come down, and I think because everything was such a blur to me now, I don't even really know who these people were. What their roles were, I don't know, but they kind of did their assessments, pulled the curtains around whilst I've got a man opposite me going through some kind of crisis. But they pull the curtains around, they sort of do their own examination, and they say, to be honest, we think that most of the pregnancy matter, which is what I learned, my baby, because to me it
Yeah.
was my baby at that point. That was a baby to me. In that moment, I know for other people in those circumstances, but if you started to plan your life with another child, then it's a baby to you. So yeah, something I kind of reflected on after is that that's a really, really unpleasant way to, or unpleasant term to hear when you're in that situation. So they felt that things were fine. But I was going to go up to this ward anyway, which I did. I was examined again, and they said, well, actually, no, there's a lot of clotting still. You are bleeding far too heavily. We need to intervene here. So I don't know how we went from everything's okay to actually, no, not at all.
Yeah, like you can't see my face with people who are listening, but I can't believe that. You go literally one extreme to another.
Yeah, yeah. So a very confusing experience to add to all my confusion and, upset and everything that I was kind of feeling in that moment. So eventually I'm in this ward. They said, yeah, you're going to need assistance. We're going to need to do a D&C. Your options are we book you in for the morning, but you need to know if somebody else, like in an emergency situation, needs an anaesthetic, then they will trump your situation. So you may end up waiting and waiting. And at this point, I'm thinking, I've got a 6-month-old baby at home, not 9 months, sorry, at this point. I just want to get home to him. I need to be at home with him. So this is my thinking. And they said, well, there is another option, and that is for you to have the procedure without an anaesthetic, which they then talked me through. And in that moment, I was thinking speed. I was thinking, I want to get home. I need to be at home. I don't want to be here. And even though at this point I was being really well looked after by the staff there, who obviously know how to care for people in this situation once I was in the ward that I should have been in, but I just wanted to be at home. It was almost took me back to kind of the trauma of being in hospital after having a baby in lockdown, not having any visitors and not having any support kind of in that moment. So it kind of took me back to that. So my instinct was get out, just get out as quickly as you can. So I agreed to that. So I stayed in overnight, and in the morning they did this procedure, which was highly traumatic. So they do numb you, but thinking about what that procedure is, so dilating your cervix and scraping away your the lining of your uterine lining, like it's a big deal. So it was, and then having to sort of decide what you want to happen afterwards as well. So there are multiple options. So, but again, I just didn't feel sort of equipped or in the right place to kind of make those decisions. And I suppose ordinarily you would have some kind of support, people who you could talk things through with to make these decisions. And they kind of did their best in that situation. But yeah, so even now I can't fully remember what decisions I made. So I believe that what they call the pregnancy matter, so the baby was and they're very keen to tell there is nothing recognizable here. So like they told me that before they did the procedure as well. So I don't know if they feel like that will bring people peace. I don't know, but I suppose they have to kind of go through everything with you and give you that sort of clarity as well. But I believe
it's like they want you to think that it's not a baby.
Yeah, disconnect from this. This wasn't a baby because actually this baby stopped growing at 6 weeks. And it's like I said, it's about context though, isn't it? If you are planning a life for that baby, it's a baby to you, and other people might not be. So for them, that might be an important way to think about that
Mm.
kind of situation. But if you are planning your life with this baby, then yeah, it's a baby to you, regardless of whether it stopped growing at 6 weeks, 10 weeks, however many weeks it was. So I believe what happened is that the baby was cremated along with other babies,
Okay.
and that sort of from early miscarriage, and that they sprinkle the ashes. So I know that's one of the options, and I believe that that is what happened. But to this day, I couldn't tell you that 100% because I just wasn't in the right place mentally to really process what the options were and make those decisions. And unfortunately, what then happened after is I went into full survival mode. So I was due to, I should have been back at work at this point. So I found out that I was miscarrying or that I had the miscarriage on the day I was due back to work from maternity leave.
Oh, okay.
So then I had another couple of weeks off. I felt there was a pressure to get me back to work. The questions I was asked about, will I need the full 2 weeks? And in my mind, I think, I don't know. I've never been through this experience before. But that again, I think fed into my belief like I shouldn't be feeling this way about having an early miscarriage because obviously other people don't see it as a big deal. So I should go back to work. And I'd planned to go, I was going back to work full time. I was compressing my hours. So I was doing all my hours in 4 days. And then I was going to have my son at home with me on the Fridays. That was our plan, which I now realise in hindsight was, not a good move. And I later changed that because, it really affected my mental health doing that.
Well done for doing that as well. Just wanted to just put that out there because not everyone can go back and recognize and actually then do something about it. So well done.
Yeah. And I think there is so much pressure on women, like you've got to work, but you've got to be a fantastic mum. And, there's financial pressure, isn't there? Our son was in nursery, which costs a lot of money. Anyone
Mhm.
that's ever had a child in childcare knows, for a lot of people, it's not worth it. But my career is important to me. But what I began to realize was not as important as my mental health, not as important as my child, of course, and my family and my relationship and all those things. So, I did do that for 2 years.
Two
And then
years.
two
Sorry, Emily, the
years.
way you spoke then, it was like, oh, you tried it for 6 months and then you went, 2 years? That's a long
Sorry, yeah,
time.
I believe it was 2 years. Will it have been 2 years? Yeah, I think it would have been 2 years. But yeah, and a lot of damage was done in that time as well. And I think this is something else that might be helpful for people to hear is like, yes, you might have to make some sacrifices, and it's not going to be possible for everybody not to go back full time. Of course, it's not. We're living in very, very hard times, but you need to think about the cost of your mental health and what impact that will have on your ability to look after yourself, be a good parent, all those things, which I later realized. And, being when you balance all those things out, you know, your health, your physical health, your mental health, your, parenting, all those things are just so much more important than, a bit of extra money or you maybe having to scrape by a little bit more. And I feel fortunate that I was in a position to do that. And I want to I want to recognize that not everybody will be able to do that. And but the pressure is unreal. And I think I never really processed the trauma that I had fully from the miscarriage until a lot later on. I didn't really stop and think about how that had impacted me. And one of the main things I think that affected me was how ill-equipped A&E are for dealing with people who are experiencing miscarriages. And again, it's something that feeds into that, not, your how I maybe said to myself and that inner voice saying, you shouldn't be this worried because if they just kind of treat you like you've gone in with a broken finger and, you
Mm.
know, we'll wrap it up, you're going home, then it's not a big deal. You know, so I think there's so many things along the way, things that people might say to you. Some people said some really insensitive things to me, and I know that they weren't coming from bad places. And I'm not going to, there were some apologies after, and I would never say what the things were, but people do say some, oh, but at least type
Yeah.
things.
Yes. I had a friend who lost a son. She had twins and she lost one of her sons. And someone actually made a comment like, at least you've got one. At least you've still got one. What? Yeah.
I think people just feel, don't they, like they need to say something when you really just want people to meet you where you are. You don't want people to, no one's going to solve this, no one's going to fix this for
Yeah.
you. What you need is for people to just like sit with you and your emotions, ask you how you're feeling. And, you know, the best thing in those situations is full honesty. I don't know if there's anything I could say or do, but I just want to be here for you. I want you to know, talk to me about it. And to let people know that it's that whatever they are feeling is valid
Yeah.
as well.
Yeah.
Um, because there was after this happened, I didn't want to like tell people at work why I'd had another 2 weeks off.
Mm.
And I felt like I had to keep it a secret. And some people's responses made me think I needed to kind of keep it a secret because some people might not want to talk about these things, and I get that.
Mm.
Or they might feel it's more of a private thing, but that almost assigns like shame to these kind
Hmm.
of experiences. And there is nothing shameful about these situations. And yeah, so I think there's still some work to be done there. And certainly in terms of how and I hope that the Bedford Hospital has moved on from these situations. I know that, you know, there's been a lot of feedback and a lot of people like yourself trying to like make a lot of changes. But yeah, I think had things been dealt with differently, maybe I wouldn't have that additional trauma or that difficulty processing it
Yeah.
afterwards. Yeah.
100%. They added to the trauma, and this is the thing. Like, so there's, you know, if our body's naturally going through a miscarriage, we know, especially if you've been through it yourself, there is limited things that people can do.
Of course.
Nature has to take its course, but it's about the journey that you go on. What can they do to support you on that journey? They don't
Yeah.
need to make it more traumatic for you. There's so many things that stood out to me listening to you. You know, standing in A&E, bleeding heavily, like that would be uncomfortable for you, but also other people as
Yeah.
well. And it's not
Yeah.
even like it's were they looking at you know, infection control and things like that? How do they know that you didn't have something that could be easily passed on to somebody else, for
Right.
example? You
Yeah.
know, so they're not even taking things that into consideration. The terminology, the language that they use is so insensitive. It's unreal, you know, and asking things like, was this a planned pregnancy? Why is that relevant? Why are you asking me this question right now? Are you trying to make me feel shameful because I'm here on my own? Is
Yeah.
that what it
Yeah.
is? Like,
Yeah.
do you know what I mean? And then things like the pregnancy maths. It's like it's the language that people are using. They don't realize the impact that has on somebody, and that
Mm.
creates trauma. And that's
Yeah.
why you can't remember what decisions you've made because you had
Yeah.
experienced so much trauma in such a small space of time. Your brain had shut down.
Yeah.
It was already in survival mode before you went home. Your brain was already in survival mode, and
Mm.
as a scientist, not that I am, but someone looking at it from a scientist's point of view, how our brain works when we're going through trauma, it does go to survival mode. We can only make basic decisions, you know, things
Mhm.
like getting out of bed, drinking a drink, eating food, not what do I do with my baby? You know,
No.
what can I, you know, what decision should I make that I may regret later on, or you know,
Mm.
you just don't know. I find that so distressing that still to this day that the doctors and the nurses and the midwives and the NHS will sit there and give you this damning information, life-changing
Mm.
information,
Yeah.
and then expect you to make informed decisions afterwards. Oh, straight away, should I say?
And if you think about when you have a baby, you make your plan, don't you? You know your plan may not go to plan. You have your contingency plan, you have your plan A, your plan B. But, you know, when I had my son, my partner advocated for me because he knew what I wanted and what I didn't want. He was able to be there when I was in established labour to advocate for me and say, what we discussed, and I wasn't in a position at that point because I've been in labour for so long to make the decisions, but he knew that based on what they were saying my choice would be a cesarean. So that is I had an emergency cesarean. He was able to advocate for me when I wasn't able to, because like you say, how can you advocate for yourself fully in those situations? And that's not a planned situation. So
Yeah.
you need to have and I fully accept, understand that in order to get up and go to their job every day, doctors, nurses probably do need to build up that resilience and treat things in their own mind in certain ways. But to me, that was the most important thing in my world in that moment.
Mm.
So to treat everybody and sort of support people in that way is really, really important. Even if, you've dealt with 10 of those situations today, that's irrelevant to that person in that
Yeah.
situation, because
Yeah.
their situation is the most important for anybody,
Yeah.
for
100%.
them in that situation. Yeah.
And that's how it should be treated. And unfortunately, if you look at statistics and if you check things like this CQC website and things like that, it's not just in your area, it's all around the UK. The
Yeah.
maternity units across the UK are in absolute dire. The conditions are terrible, and mothers and babies are dying and suffering for it because of it. So so having these conversations and sharing your experience is more powerful than you realize, because I know that it can be difficult. People will think, oh, why don't you make complaints to the hospital and things like that? But that's not easy, and that's part of the trauma.
Yeah.
It adds to the trauma. You have to relive everything, and even just putting out a letter to just talking about what happened is hard, and it's
Yeah.
not something that everyone knows how to do or knows how to do it in a right way. It's not something that's made easy for people. Even just to know how to make a complaint isn't easy. So doing things like this as well is just as important. Having these conversations, highlighting good and bad as well, and so hopefully people are listening, that they genuinely care, they can do something about it. And even if it's just, I know, a midwife or a nurse or somebody listening, hopefully now they might think about how they're going to go speak to their next patient. How are they going to pass on that information to their next patient? Or what support can they put in place for their next patient just to make their journey that little bit better? Because like you
Yeah.
said earlier, can't fix it. We can't fix it. And that's the
No.
thing. People like to try and fix things
Yeah.
in
Yeah.
situations like this. Unless they can bring you a baby, they ain't going to fix it for you.
Yeah.
So it's nice, I think, when people can sit with you in your grief
Yeah.
and not try to fix it, but just be like, yeah, this is rubbish. Like,
Yeah.
this is really rubbish.
Yeah.
And I'm here. I got you whenever you need me. So it's nice that you had a mixed bag, didn't you, by the sounds of things?
Yeah, I had some fantastic people. I had a friend who didn't even tell me. She turned up at my door with cake, and I didn't want the cake, but she came with the cake. I didn't know she was coming. She came. She cried with me. At that point, I hadn't even cried because I was like,
Oh.
I'd cried when I'd had the scan, but then I was like, right, okay, come on, because I've got to do this, I've got to do that, I've got a son. But I hadn't the I was in whatever stage that was at that point, and she almost kind of like opened me up because of her behavior. I thought, well, this is a big deal then, maybe,
Mm,
because she just turned up. She's crying, I'm crying. So yeah, I had incredible support, and people did what they're able to do as well. A friend
mm,
sent me flowers, and that's her way. And this is a big deal. I know that this is awful. And she's somebody who has continued to speak to me about it and acknowledge how awful it must be since then as well. Whereas, and I don't expect people to like say, oh, how are you after that miscarriage you had in 2021,
yes.
today. know, there are people that if I do talk about it, they are listening, and it's important to them as well, and they are happy that I've opened up to them and talked about it as well. So yeah, very mixed bag, definitely.
Yeah, I mean, I'm glad you had the support as well, because it's such a lonely place, and that's something that you've highlighted, and I want to put some emphasis on that. It's You said about your friend, because of her reaction, that you felt like it was a big deal.
Yeah.
It was a big deal, Emily. It still is a big deal. And for anybody that's listening, it's a big deal to you if you want it to be. You
Yeah.
know, everyone likes to do things differently. We're all different, we're all individual, and we all respond differently to things. I said, but majority of people, they will start planning in their head as soon as they find out they're pregnant, even if it is to plan like that's not what they want their future to look like or whatever. But
Yeah.
you make these choices, these decisions, as soon as you find out your thought process will automatically change, whichever direction you plan to go in. It will change, and especially if you wanted that baby. I mean,
Yeah.
even people who don't want the baby, and then find it they did want their baby with after they've
Yeah.
lost their baby. So
Yeah.
it is a big deal. I think it's a big deal. I really do, and I hate the way our society is, the way we're made to feel that it isn't a big deal, that we shouldn't grieve. Like I said, 6 weeks gestation, 37 weeks gestation, 6 months old, 9 years old. You've lost a baby.
Yeah.
And if it impacts you in that way, then you're valid, and that's okay.
Yeah, absolutely. And that is still something I still have to, change my self-talk about sometimes. So I fully get why people have those doubts and don't feel like that, how they feel is valid. So I'm still challenging that to this day. And that's another thing I think, talking to you about this today, that's part of that process, I think, as well, reinforcing that this, like you said, it is a big deal because it was a big deal to me and it was a big deal to my partner. And yeah, and I think I want to, yeah, an aside is that often partners in these situations as well, they are overlooked, I
Yeah.
think, as well, because we had started planning as a unit. And I think he went into kind of, I've got to look after you kind of and,
Mm.
take care of you. And I said, well, do you want to talk to your family about it? And he was like, oh, I don't want to upset them. And I was like, yeah, but what about you? So he made choices as well that were about, not really thinking about his own needs. He was thinking about other people's needs. And because he hadn't physically gone through it, I wonder, it's how other partners have felt in this situation as well. It's something we have obviously talked about since then. But yeah, I think because if you're not physically going through it, maybe you don't feel like your feelings are valid about a situation as well. So I think getting that acknowledgement is important for partners in those situations as well.
Oh yeah, 100%, 100% agree. And it's funny because I was literally just having this conversation this week with my mum and my husband saying the same thing. Because even the support that's offered to mothers, say, is very limited, I think. I don't think it's the best support. We need to improve on that. Um, but I don't know anyone that offers to the fathers.
No.
I think they have to. I mean, I could be wrong because I haven't checked every single charity and everything else. But as far as I know, if they want support, they have to go and ask for it, go and find it. It's not
Yeah.
just offered to them, you know.
No.
And they, like you said, they do get overlooked. They've lost a baby too, and then now
Yeah.
they've got that extra added responsibility of now having to look after their partner and if they've got any other children in the house as
Yeah.
well. Because
And
lots
that's
of
my
things have left to my
situation.
husband.
Yeah. Yeah. So, I wasn't in any fit state to be, doing kind of all the physical stuff around parenting. And, he was at home whilst I was in hospital. That must have felt like a really helpless situation
Mm.
as well. So, yeah, I think, it's important to acknowledge them as well, partners in these situations.
Yeah, it definitely is. I think Sands actually are doing some work on it at the moment to try and improve the aftercare given to families, including partners as well. Because I think at the minute, majority of it is being dealt with through charities, not the
Right.
NHS. So I know your local hospital now, in the last year or two, they've got Ocean's team now, so they specialize in supporting women again who have suffered PTSD after baby loss. Um, but again, it's not open to men. I
Mm,
don't believe it is anyway, as far as I know. I think it is just for women. And so listening to you as well, people often forget that it's not just the emotional impact it has on you as well. There's a physical side of things too, because I think people naively think if you have an early miscarriage, that majority of the time the baby passes naturally and it's very painless and you don't really notice. It's like having a period. It's nothing really. Because I don't know about you, but when I had my miscarriages, one of the things they said to me was actually, they tell you the statistics, 1 in 4 women experience baby loss. And often women have miscarriages quite often and don't realise because they put it down to a heavy period.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And I think that fed into me not understanding what happens when people have a miscarriage, because, that's what you're told, aren't you? That lots of pregnancies end in miscarriage and those people never know about it. But yeah, that was absolutely not, millions of people's experiences at all.
Yeah, yeah, that's what I mean. So you'll think you'll go home and, everything will just happen naturally, it'll be painless and it'll be easy. But that wasn't your story at all. And that's actually not the story for a lot of women. Anyone knows that what a D&C is, they will know that, to hear that and know what that means, and they've had experience or know somebody who has. And
Mm.
I personally know a couple of people that have had to have that. And from my understanding, it can be very painful.
Yeah. Yeah. And, again, it comes back to how do you make those decisions for yourself in that situation? Because my focus was get home. And now I realize that was a very traumatic thing to have with a male consultant, another trainee consultant, and a nurse all there while you're having this procedure, observing this procedure that you can't see, but is happening to you. But you're very aware of it because whilst there is some like numbing involved, you can feel what's happening. So
Okay.
there was, yeah, and there's trauma related to that, of course, as well. Yeah,
And
very,
it's
very difficult.
Yeah, and it goes so deep, doesn't it? It goes so much deeper than people realize. With the grief, the trauma, and then you get and our bodies, the way our bodies store the trauma. So just that experience alone, your
Yeah,
mind will play tricks on you. You'll think that everything's okay, and then suddenly you might start feeling ill or feel really tired all the time, or not sleep properly or have headaches. It's because the stress is coming out and the trauma is coming out physically in other
yeah,
ways. And again, people
yeah,
don't realize that impact that has on you as well, especially when you're dealing with it for such a long period of time. So like even listening to you when you were saying about with work and stuff like that, you put up with that for 2 years. So imagine the impact that had on you. I'm sure you can imagine the impact, the impact emotionally, but now imagine the impact physically that
yeah,
had on you as well by suppressing all of those feelings and all of that trauma. It comes out. It eventually comes out one way or another. So
yeah,
I imagine in those 2 years you may have had some health problems and things going on, or didn't sleep very well, or headaches and things like that, because you put yourself, you're continuously going through trauma, and you probably was in survival mode a lot of that time as well. Um,
100%. Honestly, when we talk about survival mode, it is something that I really only realized very recently that I was still in. So, obviously it varies, it's different for different people, but I think, I won't say too much about the work I do, but you're an emotional sponge in the work that I do. It is, I guess, it's in some respects a support role. It's a role you have to have a lot of resilience in. So I was, like you said, had all that trauma stored in my body, hadn't really processed a lot of that stuff, was going to work doing this job that requires a lot of me as a person, emotionally. And it's really, very recently, I'd say maybe like early this year, that I realized I have been in survival mode and really sort of got to grips with that and understood that and thought about, right, I need to start, you know, changing this. This has to change. I need to live my life, find who I am again. And yeah, that's a process. So I'm still in that phase
yes.
now, but I am in that phase, kind of unpicking that, working my way through those things, better self-care, all that kind of stuff as well.
Well, I just want to applaud you for that because it's not easy. And
No.
again, it's a long process. People think, oh, you lose a baby or you have an early miscarriage or a late miscarriage, whichever way it happens. And especially, I think particularly early miscarriages, people think that you can get over that a lot quicker.
Yeah.
because it's like they associate the amount of weeks that you were pregnant with and how long you should grieve for, sort of thing. Oh, you're only pregnant for 6 weeks, so
Yeah.
you only need about 6 weeks to grieve, you know. So it's an early miscarriage. You can process that a lot easier and get over it a lot quicker. But like you said, 2 years at least that you was in that survival mode processing stuff and still are in a way. And I
Yeah.
was the same. I spent at least 2 years in survival mode. I would only say my son died 4 years ago, and it was last year I would say when I actually thought, do you know what? A bit like you, it's like I had an epiphany, like what is going on? I woke up. That was why it
Yeah.
was, and I was like, I'm not just about surviving anymore. I want to start living life again, and that's when I did. And I have done, and I do, you know, lots of things that I enjoy doing, and I push myself out of my comfort zone. I've started feeling alive again. But
Yeah.
before that, I was literally in survival mode. So to get out of bed in the morning was a win for me. Like I didn't need to do much else after that. It was, you just, I eat to survive. I go and I'd play the role. I mean, I was numb for years. I pretend, imitate certain emotions so people just
Mm.
wouldn't ask me questions or have their awkward moment. But
Yeah.
inside, I was dead. I didn't feel anything.
Yeah.
So
Yeah,
that,
I can relate. I can relate to that. Yeah.
and but how long that goes on for, how long that can last for. Again, I don't think people realize how long a grieving process is.
No,
Well, it's
and I
never
think if
ending.
you're good at masking, like you said, you play the role. One of my friends said to me, I didn't even know that you were struggling with your mental health. I had no idea. And that's because, yeah, you play the role, you mask, don't you? And, I'm sure it comes out somewhere in some relationships. It certainly did sort of have some impact on my relationships. And luckily I've got an incredible partner and, we've been able to kind of work through a lot of that stuff. But yeah, we do that as humans, as women, as we're good at masking, and we don't often know what's really going on underneath for people unless they're telling us and they're talking about that.
Yeah. So anybody that's listening, let this be a note to you. If you've
Yeah.
got a friend who's been through some stuff, and it could have been 2, 3 years ago, check in on them. Just
Yeah.
say hello and see how they are. Check in on them, because you never know when someone needs a friend, and we're not always that good at asking for help when we need it. Especially people who do jobs like you, because I'm similar. I've worked in support for many years. I think people like us, we struggle the most.
Mm.
You're
Yeah.
giving support or helping somebody else, it's harder for you then
Yeah.
to ask for that help in return. So and like I said, we do dismiss ourselves sometimes.
Yeah.
It took me till I lost Zion to really fully openly acknowledge my miscarriages. I did to myself internally, but I didn't publicly.
Yeah.
Um, but yeah, now I do, and I think it's so important that we do that, and it's so powerful as well. Like I say, anybody that is listening, that hopefully you won't feel so alone now, or so isolated. That other people have got similar experiences. But
Mm.
also, it's important to have a voice. I like to think that people listening to this and hearing other people's stories and seeing how their journey was, to advocate for themselves, to feel confident to advocate for themselves and to speak up. Don't You can learn from what you're hearing,
Yeah.
there's certain things that, like, different options and things about after having a DNC and stuff like that. If you haven't experienced it, you wouldn't know that.
No.
So things like that, it's having, like, again, you don't always think of it in the time because it's such a traumatic moment, but having somebody else to talk to advocate for you as well. It might not doesn't necessarily have to be a partner. It could be a sibling or a parent or a friend.
Yeah.
Having somebody who's got a bit more of a sound mind to what you have, to be able to, or ask for time. Tell them
Yeah.
you don't want to make a decision there and then.
Yeah.
Ask them
Yeah.
to give you time, to allow you that time to process the information
Mhm.
and make an informed decision, or a best informed decision as you can at that time.
Yeah. Yeah. Absolutely. Yeah. Couldn't agree more.
Yeah, don't be afraid. And even if, like I say, it doesn't matter when it is either. Like I say, it could be a couple of years later, but you're still doing it. So actually, it's sometimes it can be harder to do it later on, because you don't necessarily want to bring everything back up or feel
Yeah.
like you're still going over the same
Yeah.
thing. But that's your story, that's your life, so don't ever worry about that. Don't worry about what other people might think in that respect. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah,
Um,
because there is that fear, isn't there? Like, well, she's still talking about that. Like, yeah, yeah, I am. And one thing I do now is if I'm talking about, particularly to like colleagues and things, if I'm talking about that period of my life and I talk about like, for the first time in my career, I had some like time off sick because of mental health as well after that, maybe like a year after I went back to work. I tell them exactly what I was going through in that period. And what normally happens, I've noticed, is people will then share something like an experience they had.
mhm.
And maybe they've never shared that with a colleague before. And, if people want to talk about it, there should be space for people to talk about it. And if people feel comfortable in their work environment to talk about it, I think we should be as well, because it was like shrouded in secrecy. I had
Mm.
another couple of weeks off, than I should have had, longer than I should have had after maternity leave. And now I'm back. And it's a bit awkward because everybody knows I've been off a bit long, but they don't really know why. They're probably, thinking, coming up with their own conclusions in their mind. But maybe if I'd been felt able to speak about it and it had felt less like a kind of shameful, secretive thing, I might have processed it differently, or got some different support, or people might have shared their experiences with me then and there as well. So
And
yeah,
it's yeah.
and reflection.
Yeah, and it's true. I've seen it. I've lived it. So, because I'm quite open and talk about things. I get lots of people that will open up to me now. And like I said, I've known them for years and never knew that they had experiences like that
Mm.
until I had mine. Then they told me about it.
Yeah,
Even the older generations, you listen to parents and grandparents that
yeah,
would then turn around and say, "Oh, well, yeah, we lost a baby too." I mean, why have we never spoken about this? Especially if you consider that baby's part of your family. Is right.
yeah,
That's what I find the most bizarre. Like I said, if your baby was 6 years old, if your child was 6 years old, and they passed away, nobody would ever forget about them.
no,
They would never not include them in anything,
no,
and they would continue to talk about that child, for the rest of their lives.
yeah,
So what's the difference if it's a baby? Just because you personally didn't have that relationship with the baby, the mother did.
yeah,
So yeah, what is the difference? And that's where we need to get to. We've got a lot of work to do.
yeah, yeah. We're still a way off.
But yeah, we're working on it. We're trying. We're fighting the game. The fight the game. We're fighting the fight. Slowly but surely. But no, and having these conversations is so
Mm.
important. So I thank you from the bottom of my heart for coming on today and telling your story.
Well, I thank you for giving me the opportunity. Yeah, and like you said, I just hope that it might help someone somewhere, in whatever way as well. And yeah, thank you for everything that you're doing as well. This is such an amazing platform to be able to kind of share those experiences.
Oh, thank you. And I say, I know how powerful it was for me to tell my story, so there was no way I couldn't open up that space to other people. Like, yeah, it's my way of doing my little bit. Um, but if there was one thing that you could have told yourself at the time, with hindsight now as your friend, what would it be?
Oh my gosh, the $1 million question. Um, Probably to listen to your instincts, I think, because there's so many points now where I'm like, why didn't I say that? Why didn't I? And I know I would have been thinking that, or, even just like, should I really be having this examination here? Should I, and I know it's not easy when you're going through those experiences, but I know those questions will have been going through my head. Listen to that. You don't have to blindly trust. Don't
Hmm.
blindly trust, and
Hmm.
listen to, you know, just because those are doctors and nurses, they're not always going to get things right. So you can speak up, listen to your instinct, and don't blindly trust. Yeah.
Oh yeah, I agree with that. I'll actually often say that, to be honest with you. It's okay to challenge, and doctors aren't always experts in everything, and sometimes you could be the expert. It's your body, it's your life, and
Yeah.
especially with how easy it is to get information these days through the internet, you often find that sometimes, especially if it's a specialist condition, you become the expert.
Yeah.
So yeah, yeah. So thank you. That's some great advice. So thank you so much, Emily.
Thank you very much.